That's not good. Okay. That worked better. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay.
As people that there wasn't contempt for, because all of the media, almost all of it, all of Hollywood, all of academia, etc., has treated us like 10-tooth rubes in flyover country that are just racist and need to shut up and die. That's how we've been treated, and so Trump was the symptom that was a result of that. And you can see when there was someone as a potential outsider to the system, how these institutions all came together to attack them. So look forward to talking about specific examples, and yeah, it should be a fun debate.
We'll get into it, and thankfully, someone who I have to extend a lot of gratitude. He was willing. 20 minutes ago, I said, hey, we had someone drop out and I need a replacement. And this man stepped up to the plate. So no matter how he does tonight, thank you for being here. Elder Drazi, give us what you got. And then we'll get to the open discussion. Yeah.
All right. So I just want to check. Can you guys hear me good? I set this up super fast. Okay, cool.
Nope, you're good.
So my understanding is the topic is why don't we trust institutions and how can we fix it? I would say the institutions, fundamentally, you should not trust them. You should have a distrust of anything that commands the power of authority to tell you either that what you should be doing, what you should be thinking. It doesn't matter if it's medical, all across the board. You should have a healthy dose of distrust, and the ones that you find out have been lying or manipulating or basically all the wonderful things that institutions have done historically that we don't like, even less so. But by its very nature, they command too much power to not corrupt the individuals that are working within it. So you have to have some distrust of it. If something is suspicious, you should be immediately looking into it. I don't think that there's any reason that they should inherently have any trust, and it's super foolish. All the worst things in history have been done by institutions, not an individual. So I would say it's inherent, built into the structure of it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Gang, we will get to super chats at the top of the hour, so keep them coming in. We'll read them out at 7, but we got to get to the discussion as we go. So thank you for the super chats, and I will read them, I promise. But now it's open floor, open discussion. What do we think? A lot's been said. Go ahead.
If I may, Drazi, I agree on a fundamental level that a healthy amount of skepticism is not only good but necessary in order for us to be appropriate participants in our institutions themselves. God forbid the world where we all just accept everything given to us by these institutions, right? That said, I think what we're discussing isn't about healthy skepticism so much as the actual degradation
Well, hold on.
due to...
Let me just ask you right there. I hate to cut you off, Parallax, but I'll ask you.
Hey,
do you think?
chill.
Do we
The dog
think?
did. You're okay.
Yeah. Do we think that the current distrust in institutions is this healthy?
No, it is unhealthy. I think we've reached a point. I think we've reached a point where, and this is something that I kind of took out when you said to shorten up the opening statements a little bit. I think that part of what Econoboy said is relevant, and I didn't want to repeat what he said, but access to information has been increased, and yet we have not taught people how to better parse that information, how to better sift through that information, how to better determine what information is valuable, not only in general, but to specifically the causes that you might advocate for, right? And subsequently, when you give people just a smattering of information, so much of it that it almost drowns you, you're going to be able, even for the most astute observers, you're going to be able to sneak some things by. And then you add in the degradation of the institutions and the distrust that has grown. With all of that in mind, I think that you are creating a clear recipe for people to take information, do very little critical thinking, very little processing of it, repeat it, and to spread misinformation and create more distrust.
And just some housekeeping, and I know that you just got here, but we can hear your typing, Elder Drazi, so if you can just push to talk or something, that'd be great. So thank you. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
If I may, to respond to that a little. So, first off, it would only be unhealthy to have I agree in general it's unhealthy to have this level of distrust, but it's not my fault that I'm distrusting of it. The reason this level of distrust exists is because it's warranted, because these institutions have proved themselves to be untrustworthy over and over again. Now, I think this talking point about social media is kind of ironic. Although certainly there's some truth to it, in a world where information is more readily available, that necessarily entails that there will be misinformation that's more able to be spread. For example, something like flat Earth may have been difficult to spread as large as it has in a world before the internet, because if you had little pockets of people talking about this stuff, it would be hard to build a big online community. However, the biggest purveyors of misinformation, at least the misinformation that becomes burrowed into people's mind, are these institutions themselves. For example, Russiagate. That was an example of misinformation that was peddled over and over again by our political class, our intel level class, by our media class that was pushed on social media, etc. And the bulk of what was being said there was untrue. This was something that was spread because these groups didn't like Donald Trump and they saw it as a potential to weaponize against him, and so they spread this to the point where we actually saw that there was counter information that was hid by these very institutions, such as John Brennan, CIA, whistleblowers coming out since then and saying they actually had information that Russia actually wanted Hillary Clinton to win because they found her to be predictable. But all of that was buried, and instead we were told 17 intel agencies all came to the conclusion, and it was all garbage. It wasn't. It was one report that came out of the CIA that a couple intel agencies signed on upon. Now, this happens over and over and over again, and what happens is, when we're lied to over and over again, people say, I don't trust them anymore. Yes, there will be will intentionally spread misinformation, but the vast majority of the worst misinformation, in that it has an effect on the most amount of people and actually changes our culture and politics, came from these institutions themselves. And until there is a reckoning for these institutions, such as the mainstream media and our government, it will happen over and over again, and people will never gain their trust back in them.
Responses.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, so I don't think that, to the extent that anything that Rob just said is correct, it kind of just goes back to my point about our democratic institutions, right? Because every country with high levels of trust in government has political controversies, has scandals, has any sort of institutional controversy that we could think of. However, the difference is not necessarily in the presence of corrupt or incorrupt, let's say, institutions. It's a matter of their policies surrounding those institutions and the democratic frameworks by which people might trust those institutions, right? So, to the extent that we might have a distrust in an institution, we might think that an institution is corrupt, right? Whether or not we agree that something like the CIA is corrupt or not, or the FBI or something like that, it's a question of like how transparently those.
Hold on, Econo Boy, though, real quick. Do you think that our CIA, FBI, and our law enforcement institutions, do you think that they're corrupt?
Well, I'm not trying to answer that question. Obviously, my point is that the answer as to whether or not they are or not corrupt is not really sort of germane, let's say, to the policies that would improve those institutions, right? So it's one thing to say, oh, well, an institution's corrupt, we just have to get rid of the institution altogether. Well, I don't really think that's true, right? Obviously, the federal police exist in all sorts of countries, but there's different levels of trust in federal police. Well, what's the difference, right? The difference is how democratic institutions are set up, right? It's not really the presence of federal police. So when right-wingers and left-wingers say we have to get rid of the FBI, I just think that's a radical solution for what is ultimately just an issue in how we set up our.
I want to give the ball to Brianna for a moment. I know she's trying to get in here.
I really agree with what you just said, Econo Boy, and I think there is one of the issues with social media is there's a disproportionate amount of focus on the scandal versus the solutions and remedies that are eventually put into place. Let me give you a really good example. When the Iraq War was going on, I protested that to the point that I ended up on the terrorist watch list. Bush had a whole scandal back then about putting war protesters on the terrorist watch list, and every time I tried to fly, it was a nightmare. So I was very, very opposed to that. It's without a doubt we had weapons of mass destruction that did not exist, and that was the reason we went to war. We focused a lot on that, and because of that, we lost a lot of trust in the CIA, our various, intelligence apparatuses, and also our military. And I was really surprised a few months ago when we really did a deep dive on what the reforms were after the weapons of mass destruction didn't exist. We created an entirely new branch of our intelligence apparatus to go through and kind of centralize where all the intelligence